Mark Stockdale, Petrol Watch spokesperson for the AA, thanks for being with us. I wanted to sort of sneak in this one before we go because of Andrew's here. Returning to the Fonterra story. So the world's third largest dairy giant announced a write-down loss of $675 million in investments, a record loss for the company. And in an opinion piece, Tom O'Connor wrote, there'd been warnings enough in this column and from some of the second and third generation farmers who warned there'd be financial calamity if the company dabbled in foreign investments. And he went on to say that one person asked, how the hell did this happen? That person happened to be Andrew Hoggard, as I understand. So while we have you here, that's your quote, and it's probably got to the heart of it. So, did you see it coming?
I guess we saw a bit of it last year, and there's been definitely rumours swirling around for a long time that particularly the Chinese investments were a complete loss. And I guess we're sort of seeing the fruition of a good portion of that, whether they will be a complete loss or whether there's still something we can get out of it. Time will tell, but I guess it's good at least we're finally getting some honesty on what this stuff's actually truly worth, that we're having a review of the strategy, that the whole world domination thing's out, it seems to be left behind and focusing on let's just sell New Zealand milk and tell the New Zealand milk story. And because in so many categories, New Zealand farmers exceed all the world's best practice. We're ranked number one animal welfare. We're, carbon footprint is the lowest in the world. Everyone wants pasture fed, and that's all we're doing here in New Zealand. There's a whole range of selling points, and yet the focus was always on these global world milk pools, which don't differentiate
Alexia,
New Zealand milk.
It was to be a $40 billion company. It was to be our Nokia. I can recall it. This was the world dominator.
White gold.
White gold.
Yeah. Is there a way back, Andrew?
I think so, in terms of just, let's focus on the knitting, which is the New Zealand milk. Let's sell that story really well. And, where there are definite synergies for overseas investments, you're always going to need to invest overseas. We're selling 95% of our milk goes overseas, so we're always going to need distribution, etc., stuff overseas. But it was always the milk pools, I think, was, that owning that milk or buying that milk overseas was always the thing that made a lot of farmers scratch their heads around why we're doing this. And to me, it never made. I was always sort of in favour of, if we're going to have milk supply from overseas, let's make them cooperative members. AL is another world big cooperative, and they're spread across, they started in Sweden or Denmark, but they're spread across numerous European 7 countries now, and so they're a cooperative across borders. And I just always, if we're going to do this, why did we sort of we acted as a cooperative in New Zealand, but then a corporate in Australia? Just seemed weird. But hopefully we're on the right track now. Okay, and very good to have your take on this. And to both of you, thank you very much for being part of today's panel. Alexia Russell, newsroom journalist and Vice President. Still Vice President. Vice President of Federated Farmers, Andrew Hoggard, thank you very much. Thanks to me, I'm Wallace Chapman. Back tomorrow, 3:45. See ya.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, the ongoing quest to get an audience with anyone from state-owned Quake insurer Southern Response. We asked them for an interview. They threatened to call the police and trespass our reporter. A neo-Nazi offshore is selling what's believed to be the accused Christchurch gunman's manifesto online. The foreign students' nervous wait for their qualifications after their tertiary provider is abruptly deregistered. On the eve of a mass march to the Prime Minister's electorate office is a resolution in sight for Ehu Mato, and convicted sex offender Cardinal Pell loses his appeal. A British consulate worker in Hong Kong disappears after allegedly taking part in pro-democracy protests.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Islamic Women's Council is urging the government to approach Ukrainian authorities over the sale of the accused Christchurch gunman's manifesto. It has been republished in paperback and sold through an online messaging app channel run by a neo-Nazi in Ukraine since June. The council's acting head, Anjum Rahman, says the manifesto spread is dangerous. She says it highlights the need for action like the Christchurch call, but says the government should ask Ukrainian authorities to identify those involved and shut down any far-right platforms. However, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says that she can't do anything to stop the manifesto's distribution.
It's more than a concern, it's abhorrent and it's disgusting, but it is being sold in a jurisdiction over which we have no control. It just demonstrates the difficulty we have now in this current environment of dealing with the spread of what we in New Zealand would consider really objectionable material.
Jacinda Ardern says international action like the Christchurch call is making a difference, but it can't fix everything. The police in Northland are welcoming the heavy prison sentences given to a man and woman involved in a massive drug bust on 90 Mile Beach 3 years ago. The police seized half a tonne of methamphetamine stashed in a camper van and in the sandhills at Ahipara. The haul was worth about $500 million, making it the biggest drug bust in New Zealand history. 8 people were arrested for importing a Class A drug. The last 2 offenders were sentenced today in the High Court in Whangarei. Stevie Norua Cullen to 27 years and Selaima Whakausi-Lea to 12.5 years. Detective Senior Sergeant Lloyd Schmid says the arrests, convictions and sentences are a great outcome. He's paying tribute to people in the Kaitaia area who were suspicious of the group and tipped off the police. The opposition says the departure of another executive from KiwiBuild proves the policy is beyond saving. The head of KiwiBuild Commercial, Helen O'Sullivan, is cutting her 6-month contract short by a month in order to take up a new CEO job in the private sector. Cabinet ministers are currently working on the long-promised KiwiBuild reset. But National's housing spokesperson Judith Collins says it looks like people are jumping off a sinking ship.
We've got a chief executive who doesn't want to ruin her reputation to being linked to this reset.
Judith Collins says KiwiBuild has been a failure since day one and needs to be abandoned altogether. The Housing Ministry says Ms O'Sullivan strongly supports KiwiBuild and leaves with its best wishes. King Tuheitia has challenged Maori to find their own solutions for looking after and protecting tamariki. He put the wero down in his annual address on the 13th anniversary of his coronation in Ngāruawāhia today.
My challenge is to the whānau hapu iwi to take care of our tamariki and where the need arises to place them in a safe home. We must avoid blaming the government. We need to work on a solution. We have a chance to design the solution on our own.
Kiingi Tuheitia speaking at Tūranga Waiwai Marae. A public health academic who opposes plans to fine parents for smoking in a car with children has been criticised for not being transparent about her own funding. Mārewa Glover told the Health Select Committee earlier today that the Smoke-Free Amendment Bill would do nothing to protect children and would unfairly affect Māori women. Her comments shocked other submitters, including the head of the Public Health Association, Prudence Stone, who questioned Dr Glover's motives.
I would advise you from here on to clarify with every submitter whether or not they are receiving tobacco industry funding for their hearing scripts today and for their submissions written towards this legislation.
Prudence Stone told MPs her association receives no backing or funding from the tobacco industry. The government will be rushing through legislation ensuring bars can stay open during the Rugby World Cup next month. It has adopted a bill put forward by the ACT leader David Seymour, modelled on the legislation passed for the 2015 tournament. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says some clubs are currently struggling to get a minor extension to their hours.
We can sort of muck around and say go back and reapply to your district licensing committee. That's going to take a long time. The Rugby World Cup starts pretty soon, so let's just cut to the chase, allow them to get a few extra hours, host an atmosphere of conviviality and get on with it and let people enjoy themselves.
Andrew Little. National also supports the bill, so there should be no obstacle to its swift passage through Parliament. It's 5:05. The appeal of coaching at international level has waned for Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua, and Netball New Zealand may struggle to hold on to her beyond January. Taurua's contract ended after the Silver Ferns World Cup triumph, but she has agreed to stay on for 2 more series, October's Constellation Cup and the Northern Quad Series in England in January. Netball New Zealand had hoped to sign Taurua on for another 4 years through to 2023 World Cup, but Taurua is unsure if such major events excite her anymore, saying she prefers working at club level.
What I've always loved about head coach is that I'm on the ground with club stuff and you have players 7-8 months of the year. That's the most thing I love about being a coach. At the internationals, it's a shorter period of time. Pull them together. You might have a week before you have international series. So it's about getting the combinations more, not necessarily coaching because you've got what you got.
Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua. Lisa Carrington will begin her bid for a 9th world title when the Canoe World Champs begin in Hungary tonight. The 30-year-old is chasing her 7th world title in her favourite event, the K1 at 200 metres, in which she has also won the past 2 Olympic Games. Leading New Zealand baseball player Kyle Glagowski will return to the Auckland Tuatara for the Australian Baseball League this summer. He has been playing with one of the Philadelphia Phillies feeder clubs during North America's Major League season. That's the news.
Same-sex penguins?
Our penguin pairs try to breed, but unfortunately they are both boys, and so they try to breed within a stone and with old fishes.
Takahe swingers?
It's just been a bit of a marriage arranged at first sight. So, all things looking good at this stage.
And the gull petrol?
There's hooks with them. I mean, some of them you've got to sort of, stand on one leg and wink your eye to get the discount, and then it only applies to X number of litres and you've got to spend Y to get it.
We will get you going. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, ethicist Nita Farahani on the looming possibilities of mind-reading technology and what happens to our privacy. And after 10, historian Timothy Weingard on the mosquito, our deadliest predator. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island except Gisborne through to Wairarapa. Showers, possibly heavy. Hail tomorrow, isolated squally thunderstorms, mainly in the north. Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered rain, clearing later tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow with rain about the ranges, but 1 or 2 showers spreading further east. Nelson and Marlborough, rain overnight, fine apart from isolated showers tomorrow. Buller through to Fiordland, rain about Fiordland, spreading elsewhere this evening, possibly thundery. Turning to showers early tomorrow, some heavy with hail and isolated thunderstorms. Canterbury through to Southland, patchy rain developing this evening, clearing early tomorrow, isolated showers about Southland and the Southern Lakes tomorrow afternoon and evening. Chatham Islands cloudy, occasional rain from tomorrow afternoon, heavier in the evening and possibly thundery. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Southern Response could be costing you upwards of $300 million following a court judgment that found it acted in a misleading and deceptive way. So who's responsible for the costly actions of the state-owned quake insurer, and why aren't they fronting up to answer questions about the enormous bill that you could be picking up? And are they going to throw more of your hard-earned money into appealing this through the courts, or should they just pay quake claimants what they owe? In essence, Southern Response was running a 2-quote system where it provided an abridged version of a cost assessment to rebuild Carl and Alison Dodd's quake-destroyed home. It kept secret from the couple the full detailed repair analysis. The couple unwittingly settled on the lesser figure, meaning they were shortchanged more than $200,000. But last week, the High Court ordered Southern Response to pay up. And since then, we've been chasing Southern Response for some answers. It's hard to find anyone from Southern Response to front up, and trust us, the Checkpoint team has been searching far and wide. Our Christchurch reporter Logan Church and cameraman Simon Rogers headed to their office today for the second day in a row to see if the state insurer could lift its response.
Hello, how you going? Hello. Hi, Logan Church again from Radio New Zealand.
We'll let you know how Logan got on a little later. Now, the Dodds case is significant because they're not alone. In fact, their lawyer estimates putting right Southern Response's wrongs could cost you a pretty penny or an ugly amount of money, depending on your take. Last week, Peter Woods estimated it could be in excess of $300 million.
This covers people who settled their claims by buying another house before October 2014, and Southern Response has said there were about 1,650 of those, and they've estimated that this could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But there is also another category of people that probably fit into it as well. I don't know how many there are. I've seen an estimate of a total of about 3,000 homeowners, in which case the amount involved will be well north of $300 million.
And surprise, that rather weighty, unexpected bill is on us, the taxpayer. Southern Response is, after all, a state-owned quake insurer owned by us, and you might think answerable to us. Checkpoint wanted to know who approved the two-quote system that Southern Response was using, and critically, who decided keeping the full detailed repair analysis secret from claimants while supplying them with much lower quotes was a good idea, and why. A deep dive into Justice Gendell's decision in the Dodds case goes some way to explaining that.
Around May 2011, Southern Response, at a senior strategic management level, made the new policy decision that Arrow's estimations of those fees would not be given to claimants. As it was claimed, they were confusing.
Senior strategic management level. So that's who exactly? Under oath and under cross-examination, Southern Response's claims settlement manager, Elizabeth Fife, was pretty much asked that. Here's the relevant bit from the court transcript.
Who decided to remove the costs into the internal AMI office use section?
So that would be the executive, the CEO and the board themselves.
So at the highest level?
Yes, it was, sir.
In 2011, when Southern adopted this policy, the CEO was Peter Rose. Ross Butler was the board chair. Checkpoint has made several attempts to reach Ross Butler and Peter Rose. Cue crickets. We asked to speak to Elizabeth Fife, Southern Response's claims settlement manager and a witness for Southern Response in the Dodds case. Here's Southern's written response.
Liz Fife is not one of the media spokespeople for Southern Response, so we are declining that request for an interview.
The current board chair, Alistair James, has also repeatedly refused to be interviewed.
You have telephoned Alistair James. I'm sorry I'm not available at the moment. Please leave your name and telephone number and I will return your call as soon as possible.
Instead, he sent us a text saying he won't engage during the 20-day appeal period. But he did tell Checkpoint on Monday we could expect a written statement and they were preparing a message for their customers. We're still waiting for that statement. And Southern Response has outright refused to front anyone for an interview. We want to ask Southern Response if it's going to appeal the Dodds decision, how much that is likely to cost and exactly how much money it's spent on litigation so far. What advice has it had on its potential liability? That is the total amount of money taxpayers may have to stump up with. And what pot is that cash coming from? Questions that are probably taking up space in Grant Robertson's mind as Quake Minister and Minister in charge of the taxpayer's chequebook. But the Minister didn't want to talk to us about it either. And here's part of an email his press sec sent to us.
I have asked for official advice on the judgment and its potential ramifications for the Crown, but I will await Southern Response's decision before I make any further comment.
So political reporter Joe Moyer did us a solid and chased down the Minister as he was heading to question time at Parliament, because we have a lot of questions.
Mr Robertson, do you think that Southern Response should appeal the Dodds decision?
Look, that is a decision for the Southern Response Board and they are working their way through that at the moment. I don't think it would be useful for me to comment while that legal process is underway.
What conversations have you had with Southern Response about this though?
Oh, look, as the Minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission and as one of the shareholding ministers, I've obviously been aware of the Board's strategy. I'm currently getting advice from officials around what the impact on this might be overall for the Crown, and that's my focus at at the moment.
Do you think taxpayer money should go into further litigation?
Well, the issue we have here is an enormous amount of taxpayer money has been spent fixing up the mess that we inherited here, both in terms of issues like on-solds and re-repairs, and now there is the potential for a bill here as well. So my view is that this is a legacy issue that we're having to deal with. The specific way that Southern Response now acts is up to the board.
Has Treasury said anything to you about possible liability?
I don't want to comment on that at this stage.
Why?
Because we are in the middle of a legal process.
And that's all the Minister had time for, so no specifics on that critical advice from Treasury. In email exchanges, the Minister's office specifically says that advice is on the judgment and its potential ramifications for the Crown and the scale of liability. Checkpoint contacted Treasury directly, asking for that advice. Here's part of its email response.
In June 2019, the Treasury prepared an update for Minister Robertson as the incoming minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission. The report was on the unquantifiable fiscal risks for the Crown and Crown-owned entities relating to the Canterbury earthquakes. This report did refer to the Dodds case and the possibility of an adverse outcome. However, given that it was prepared in June, it was prepared without knowledge of the actual decision on Friday. Since Friday, the Treasury has not produced any estimate of the possible liability arising from the Dodds case. This is because Southern Response and its advisors are still considering the decision and its implications.
So no new liability assessment yet. In plain speak, no new estimate of how much this could cost you, the taxpayer. But in the Dodds case alone, Justice Gendel ordered Southern Response to pay them $178,894.30 plus interest dating back to December 2013, plus costs. And this is just one case. There could be up to 3,000 others. Remember, others in the legal profession estimate it's a $300 million plus bill. We have asked for copies of the earlier Treasury advice. Treasury says it's likely to release that, but it will probably keep the liability estimates around the Dodds case secret. That brings us back to Southern Response. After repeated requests for an interview, our Christchurch reporter, Logan Church, made his way to their office and asked to talk to the chief executive.
Hello, how you going?
Hello.
Hi, Logan Church again from Radio New Zealand. Is this Mr. Honeybone here today?
No.
No? Is he not in the office?
Not to speak with you.
No? Why not?
To my understanding, you need permission to film on this property.
Yeah. So when would Mr. Honeybone be available?
Give you that permission.
Okay. So when will Mr. Honeybone be available?
So I'm going to have to unfortunately ask you to leave.
So when will Mr. Honeybone be available?
And if you refuse to leave, you will be trespassing, and I'll have no choice but to contact the police.
Okay. I just would really obviously like to speak to Mr. Honeybone, but he's not available today.
Picked up on that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate you doing your job.
Thank you very much.
So, no one from Southern Response willing to accept our invitation to be interviewed. Instead, a counter-invitation. Leave our office or we'll call the police and trespass you. But Southern Response says it will consider written questions from Checkpoint. We've sent a list. Southern Response is a state-owned company. Now, that means it's funded by you, the taxpayer. So where would you prefer your tax dollars to go? For Southern Response to appeal the High Court ruling or just pay the quake-hit homeowners? You can vote in our online poll on Facebook or send us your feedback. It is about 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, if you do want to get in touch about that story or anything else you hear on the show this evening, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The accused Christchurch gunman's manifesto is being republished in paperback and sold through an instant messaging app. A neo-Nazi in Ukraine is distributing the document through an online channel set up 2 days after the March 15 attacks. The manifesto has already been classified as objectionable in New Zealand, but the Prime Minister admits there is nothing authorities here can do to stop it being distributed overseas. Annika Smith has more.
While the accused awaits his terror trial next year, his manifesto is being translated into Ukrainian and sold online. The messaging app Channel, set up 2 days after the shootings, is being run by a neo-Nazi and hosts more than 1,000 followers. It openly praises Brenton Tarrant and, since a few months ago, has been used as a platform to distribute a translated version of his manifesto. Independent Research Solutions researcher Ben Alley, who has studied the rise of the alt-right online, isn't surprised the document is being traded.
I haven't seen the manifesto redistributed a great deal on 4chan or 8chan, but there are a lot of people there who are definitely fans of the accused and so would be pretty keen to get a hold of it.
In June, the channel's administrator told subscribers he'd found a publisher who could make copies of the manifesto. He thanked a follower for the idea to produce it as a book and encouraged those who couldn't pay for one to print their own. Since then, a series of photos of people posing with a copy have been posted in the forum. In one, a line of 7 men stand holding a copy in front of them, while another captures the book next to a pair of child's hands playing with a small toy truck. The chief censor, David Shanks, who classified the manifesto as objectionable in March, says the distribution is concerning.
It's incredibly disappointing to see a platform that can be accessed by New Zealanders making available publications that are unlawful in this country.
David Shanks says the document has the potential to incite violence.
It is a terrorist promotional document. It's not going to persuade or harm most people who read it, but it's not for most people. It has been created specifically for those people who are on a pathway to radicalisation.
Ben Alley says the accused's manifesto is treated by the far right as an important document.
They take him very seriously and are very pleased with what he is accused of having done. It's not clear necessarily whether they are likely to go out and do the same things themselves or not, but they've certainly treated the attack here in Christchurch as being a component of their ideology and a result of it.
The acting head of the Islamic Women's Council, Anjum Rahman, says there's no doubt the manifesto's spread is dangerous, pointing to several mass shootings in the United States that have referenced the March 15th attacks.
Extremely disturbing because we know that it has been used as motivation to take further life, and so the importance of dealing with this is very, very high.
She says it highlights the need for action like the Christchurch call, but says the government should approach Ukrainian authorities to identify those involved and shut down any far-right platforms.
We can't, as a nation, deal with this on our own, and that's why the work around the Christchurch call and any other work around international agreements is so important.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has condemned the sale of the manifesto, but says her hands are tied.
It's more than a concern, it's abhorrent and it's disgusting, but it is being sold in a jurisdiction over which we have no control. It just demonstrates the difficulty we have now in this current environment of dealing with the spread of what we in New Zealand would consider really objectionable material.
She says the Christchurch call, a voluntary agreement to stop violent extremism and terrorist content from spreading online, will make a considerable difference, but it can't fix everything. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Annika Smith tēnei.
Upset foreign students are demanding answers after their tertiary education provider was deregistered by NZQA. The Kiwi Institute of Training and Education, or KITE, operates 2 campuses in Auckland, 1 in Hamilton and a 4th in Christchurch. Just after lunch today, 20 students arrived at immigration lawyer Alistair McClymont's office to say the school they'd been studying at had been deregistered. Mr McClymont told our reporter Alex Perrottet and cameraman Nick Munro most of the students had finished their study and were waiting for their qualifications to be awarded, but now that was all on hold.
What's happened before is NZQA have gone in and had a look at the quality of the marking to see whether it's at the NZQA standards. They've found that it hasn't been at those standards, so they haven't awarded the NZQA qualification that the students have paid for because the teaching and the marking has been substandard. And it looks like that's what they're now investigating, and that the students will be told next week what's likely to happen. But of course, if NZQA decide that the marking is not up to standard, then they're not going to get their qualification. happens. They may be offered the opportunity of going and doing the subjects again at another school or the whole course again. We don't know. And these guys are all worried. They don't know what's going to happen to their investment and what's going to happen to their future.
You've been really critical of the government lately in terms of where they're focusing their attack in this area. There's obviously weaknesses in the system, but it's the students who are losing out, and you're saying that's not quite the tone that the government was using before it came into power. What's your message about this, as it seems to be happening more and more?
Well, remember, these students had these courses marketed to them by NZQA-approved schools. Student visas were given by Immigration New Zealand because they felt that the quality of the schools were good. So these people came here with an understanding that these were all government-approved courses, and that the marketing also centred around not only a New Zealand qualification but postgraduate work rights and a pathway to residency. And these things just really don't exist. I mean, the whole thing is basically a money-making exercise, and all of these guys here are victims. I mean, they're all being ripped off, not just by the schools, but by the New Zealand government as well. Now, if we have a government who claims that they're in the support of the victims and they want to come down hard on exploitation of migrant workers and students, then they need to do something for these guys, because they're out of pocket. And a lot of them have spent their whole family's fortune on studying here. They've had to borrow money, they've had to sell assets and sell land to come here with promises through marketing done by the New Zealand government for qualifications, work rights and a pathway to residency, which doesn't exist. And if the government wants to support victims of exploitation, well, here are the guys now that need that support right now.
So you're going to be advising many of these students. What are your concerns about their visa status, for instance, at the moment?
Well, I understand that most of the visas are finishing in late September. Immigration New Zealand has to extend their current visas immediately while they're investigating this, because many of these people here are working part-time, which they're allowed to do as students. Now, if Immigration New Zealand just give them visitors visas, they will lose their part-time jobs and they can't continue working. So they have to extend their student visas while they're doing this investigation. They have to allow them to continue working part-time so they can financially maintain themselves, and they need to give them a resolution fast. And that doesn't mean making them pay to go and study the whole qualification again. I mean, if there's a single paper which is not up to standard, then just allow them to do that paper with the refund so that they're not out of pocket, so that they can get their qualification and get their work rights as quickly as possible.
Okay, that's your message to Immigration New Zealand. It does sound, though, that you're saying NZQA has really dropped the ball here.
Well, I mean, NZQA were the ones who approved the school in the first place. They are the ones who had the oversight, so questions need to be asked. But, you know, most of these schools are now closing down or have closed down, so, you know, it's quite likely they've cleaned up the worst of it. But, you know, this was a government-sponsored export education scheme, and the government needs to step in and do something to help the victims. And these people are all victims of an export education scheme, which was basically a scam. So the government needs to help these people immediately.
Strong words there, Alistair McClymont. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to talk to a couple of the people who are really affected by this. Karam, you've been studying. This is Karam. And so tell us a little bit about what investment. Alistair was talking about the investment that you've made. You've been a victim of a scam, he's saying. Yeah. What's outline? How much have you paid for this course?
I came here in 2015. I first started my hospitality courses. After then, I just decided to go for the business management, because in future I just want to, after get a residency, I just want to start my own business. When I start my level 5 in kites, and after then they changed the policy. My dad passed away. I have to go back India. My visa also expiring at same time. They said you have to do IELTS and PT, but same time we are not getting our dates for the PT and IELTS. So they just make a new solution as well. You can do a level 4 as well. For level 4, we have to again pay $5,000 to the college.
Right, so just stop there. How much have you paid out already to the college?
Almost I paid it might be $35,000 or $40,000 in the last 4 years.
And what have you received so far in terms of qualification?
I just got 2 diplomas. It's like the paper. I can't do with that anything, because there is a requirement. I need a level 5-6 diploma for my work visa as well.
And how far off were you from getting that level 5 or 6?
I'm just waiting for my level 6 result. I already submitted my assignments. I'm just trying to sporting to the visa.
So you've done all the work,
Yeah,
Karen.
I already done my work. And if I fail in any paper, we can't go with the college policy for the reset or reset chance. We have to go in another college for the cross credit. I have no idea in cross credit how many papers we have to do it again. I just have a simple request. If we have to do a cross credit, if I fail in one paper, I have to do only one paper there. Don't need to do any 3 or 4 papers there.
Okay, so you're saying you've done all the work for the qualification, all the work for the course, but what has the school, KITE, that's the Kiwi Institute of Training and Education, what have they told you today?
Actually, on 15 July, NZQ asked them to shut down your college. We are cancelling your registration. If you have any evidence, you can finish all of the students, so just let us know. And last Friday, they request to the NZQA KITES College, and we are financially facing a difficulty. We can't continue. We would just want to cancel our registration.
But what have they told you about your status, your qualification?
I just have to wait for the next Monday or Tuesday for the result. If you are passing all of the papers, and then you will get your diploma level 6. Otherwise, if I fail in any paper, they will refund my fees, and I have to go in another college.
Okay, all right. Well, look, Lisa, as you can see, big crowd here. Many questions for the government. There's a lot to happen, but these guys very much left in limbo. The tone we're getting from them is that this is a cynical move, that they've paid out $30,000 to $40,000 each, already finished all the work, and KITE, the Kiwi Institute of Training and Education, deregistered by NZQA right at the end of their studies. We'll put questions through to the NZQA as well as Immigration New Zealand to see how these students, as well as many others that might be affected, can find a way forward.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Qualifications Authority says it will communicate with KITE staff and students over the next week, and students will hear from NZQA shortly. Checkpoint has asked KITE for comment, but has not yet received a response. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a British consulate worker in Hong Kong has been detained after allegedly taking part in pro-democracy protests. As activists plan to march on the Prime Minister's electorate office tomorrow, is a solution close for Ehu Mato? And the flamingo versus the lime. The scooter wars gather speed. We'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard so far on the programme this evening. Do text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're getting a bit of feedback on the Southern response issue. Please do keep it coming. Here's the headlines with Susanna.
The Islamic Women's Council is urging the government to approach Ukrainian authorities over the sale of the accused Christchurch gunman's manifesto. It's been published in paperback and sold through an online messaging app channel run by a neo-Nazi in Ukraine. The council's acting head, Anjum Rahman, says the manifesto spread is dangerous. The Prime Minister says she thinks the book is abhorrent, but there is nothing her government can do in another jurisdiction. The judge who sentenced a man to 27 years in prison for importing methamphetamine says stiff sentences are essential in such cases. Stevie Norua Cullen and Selaima Fakausilea, who was sentenced to 12.5 years, are the last 2 of 8 people sentenced for their role in the 500-tonne meth bust at 90 Mile Beach in 2016. In the High Court in Whangarei, Justice Gordon said the law demanded an emphatic response to the unprecedented scale of the crime. The opposition says the departure of another executive from KiwiBuild proves the policy is beyond saving. The head of KiwiBuild Commercial, Helen O'Sullivan, is cutting her 6-month contract short by a month to take up a job in the private sector. Cabinet ministers are working on the long-promised KiwiBuild reset, but National says it looks like people are jumping off a sinking ship and KiwiBuild needs to be abandoned altogether. The government will be rushing through legislation ensuring bars can stay open past their normal hours during the Rugby World Cup next month. It has adopted a bill put forward by the ACT Party leader modelled on the legislation passed for the 2015 tournament. National also supports the bill, so there should be no obstacle to its swift passage through Parliament. People on the Kapiti coast are being urged to stay out of the Waikanai estuary and river mouth and Mazengarb stream after a sewage pipe broke. The District Council says the pipe was damaged by contractors building a roundabout, and a small amount of raw sewage went down a drain that runs into the stream before a temporary repair was made. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get down to business news now with Kim Savage. Kim, A2, the specialty milk company, has had a record profit, but what? Investors aren't really that impressed?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the numbers and you tell me if you'd be happy, Lisa. So close to $288 million in profit. That is almost up half on last year. If we look at the revenue side of things, the money coming in up 40%, just a mere $1.3 billion in revenue coming in for A2 Milk. A fair bit of money we're talking about here.
A lot of zeros, why aren't people happy?
Well, what we saw happen is that investors were expecting a little bit more here. It seems like the expectation was for more around the $300 million mark as far as that profit is concerned. And just by the way, A2 Milk being the specialty milk company, it specialises in infant formula, has the highest market capitalisation, so that is the value of the shares which are outstanding. Basically, it's the most valuable company on the stock exchange. That's why we watch it this closely and why, obviously, we watch its moves on the share market. And so what we saw is investors not overly happy with this. Its share price actually dropped 15% on its result, its full year result this morning. Ended up dragging down that benchmark top 50 index about 1.5% with it too. So obviously it has an impact on the wider share market as well. The quote that was sort of bandied about today was, buy the rumour, sell the fact. What we've seen with A2's share price is that it's climbed about 50% over the past year, and then obviously the 15% drop today. And so brokers we talked to suggested that it was just around the expectations not quite being met, although obviously those numbers were very positive and a record, I might add. The company, though, not worried about what it really considers to be the sort of day-to-day moves on the share market. It says it's reinvesting in the business. It's a growth company. One of the analysts who follows A2 Milk, who I spoke with just a short time ago, said that nothing to be concerned about really. You'd expect with a growth company of this nature that they would be putting their money back into the business. They're not paying a dividend to shareholders, but that they are on track to some positive things in future, and that this is the kind of the direction they need to be going in, and the right one as it happens.
Bring us up to date on Fletcher Building. So it's back in the black, is it?
Yes, so you'll remember that this time last year we were talking about Fletcher Building having a net loss of $190 million. And of course all the sort of the issues and the commentary that sort of came with that. So this year we're talking a profit of $164 million. So back in the black for Fletcher Building. Of course, last year it was hit by project losses and write-downs, and really over the last 12 months it's been a period of strategic review for the company. It's shed parts of the business, its roof tile business, its Formica business as well. It's ditched those, really returning to its core operations. Also suspended at the start of last year bidding for contracts in that vertical construction space, basically the sort of commercial construction area. It has resumed those contracts now, so it's sort of starting to get back on track. Fletcher's chief executive, Ross Taylor, in talking to him today, he's very positive about the progress they've made over this 12 months. And of course, getting back into the black is a good move for them. Going to be a much leaner organisation going into this year after a lot of the shedding that the company's been doing over the past 12 months.
And what else has been going on with the rest of the markets today?
Well, the NZX Top 50, that benchmark index, did close down about 1%, as I mentioned earlier in the day, down about 1.5%, 95 points lower at 10,709. And looking at some of those stocks which I've talked about, those companies, A2 Milk down 12% at the close, $2 lower, closed at $14.81. And Fletcher Building up more than 3% actually, at $4.72. If we look at the currency, 64 US cents and 95.5 Australian.
Thanks, Kim. Kim Savage with our business news this evening. Let's head offshore now. The most senior Catholic cleric ever to be convicted of child sex abuse is back behind bars after failing in his bid to have his convictions quashed. The Australian Cardinal George Pell was jailed for 6 years in March after being found guilty of sexually abusing 2 choir boys when he was Archbishop of Melbourne in the 1990s. Today, his appeal was dismissed in a 2-1 decision by the Victorian Court of Appeal. Elizabeth Brown reports.
George Pell arrived from prison at the court in Melbourne, where a large crowd of reporters were waiting, along with a line of people stretching the length of the building, eager to get in. He sat quietly as the Appeal Court Chief Justice Anne Ferguson announced the decision.
By a majority of 2-1, The Court of Appeal has dismissed Cardinal Pell, George Pell's appeal against his conviction for the commission of sexual offences. He will continue to serve his sentence of 6 years imprisonment.
Before his very public fall from grace, Pell had moved up the ranks of Australia's Catholic Church to serve as a treasurer at the Vatican and a trusted advisor of the Pope. His central ground for appeal was that the guilty verdicts were unreasonable because there was insufficient evidence for a jury to be satisfied of his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Pell was convicted of abusing 2 boys. One victim died of a heroin overdose in 2014 at the age of 31 and didn't live to see justice. Viv Waller, the lawyer for the surviving choir boy whose evidence led to Pell's conviction, read a statement on his behalf.
The journey has taken me to places that, in my darkest moments, I feared I would not return from. The justice machine rolls on, with all of its processes and punditry, almost forgetting about the people at the heart of the matter.
For many abuse survivors and victims' rights advocates, the fact Pell's convictions have been upheld are a turning point. Chrissy Foster, whose 2 daughters were abused by Catholic priests, said it's a great day.
It's a hard crime to get a conviction in the first place. Hardly anyone comes forward, and this has been an outstanding example of justice, and just amazed.
But it might not be over yet. Pell's lawyers say they're now studying the judgment and are looking at the possibility of another appeal, this time to the country's highest federal court in Canberra. One victims campaigner, Leonie Sheedy, says today's decision should send a message to the Catholic Church, and any attempt at another appeal would be a waste of time and money.
I think the Catholic Church needs to stop wasting money on appeals and give that money that they would spend on fancy lawyers to the victims of their crimes.
The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says he expects Pell will now be stripped of his Order of Australia, and he extended his sympathies to all victims of child sexual abuse.
Events like this today bring it all back, and I would urge Australians who find themselves reliving these experiences to reach out to those around them, to reach out to the services that are there for them, and whatever phase of life they're in. These things can take you back a long way, and so that's where my sympathies are.
Pell has released a statement through his lawyers saying he's disappointed with today's decision and still maintains his innocence. Under the terms of his sentence, he'll be eligible for parole after serving 3 years and 8 months of his 6-year sentence. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown, Tēnei.
Back home now, and the government wants to be able to direct councils to free up planning rules to allow cities to grow both out and up in a bid to solve the housing crisis. The Urban Development Minister, Phil Twyford, and Environment Minister, David Parker, unveiled the proposed new strategy at a housing development in Porirua this morning. And they're confident their plan will be able to reassure even the most sceptical NIMBY. Yvette McCullough was at the announcement and filed this report.
Caris Executive Chairman Sir Paul Adams says the Resource Management Act and overly restrictive planning rules are hindering development. He says it played a role in slowing down the 800-home development in Kinaparu, Porirua.
But that really cost us about a year and a lot of money in terms of planning, which is really just a waste at the end of the day, and it gets passed on to the end purchaser, obviously.
Phil Twyford says under the government's proposal, councils, particularly in the 6 high-growth areas, will be given a clear direction to loosen their rules.
It tells councils that they must make room for growth. They must free up the planning rules in the cities, in their urban core and around transport corridors. They must lift the height and density restrictions that currently stop people building the kinds of homes that they want.
Councils will also have to take a long-term approach to urban planning that brings together transport, housing and infrastructure. Mr Twyford says the focus will be on high-quality development that avoids the pitfalls of sprawl.
It's possible to create high and medium density communities with quality urban design and provision for open spaces that will reassure the most sceptical NIMBY.
David Parker is reassuring this won't mean cities are overrun by high-rise apartments. He says this plan will help shift the attitudes of councils and ratepayers concerned about intensification.
I think most people accept that when you've got the number of people who are sleeping on the streets that we see in some of our main centres, something's got to change. And you can't change things without changing things.
The government says it has broad support from councils for this plan. Porirua Mayor Mike Tana is a fan.
This, I think, is a great response to ensure that we're all connected up, local government, central government, and the developers as well. This is an enabler.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff has welcomed the move, but has cautioned against planning for growth without having the funding to go with it. He says there needs to be some degree of revenue sharing between central and local government, a sentiment echoed by Tauranga Mayor Greg Brownless.
We need significant investment by government in the transport networks to service that housing. I'd also like to see government look at ways of helping councils fund the costs of growth.
The government says it won't be giving councils extra funding to carry out their planning duties, but it is looking at ways to help with funding and financing infrastructure. But National's urban development spokesperson Judith Collins says the strategy is full of flowery words that don't mean much. She says it's a stopgap for proper RMA reform that she says won't be forthcoming.
Well, the RMA is going to remain in its current form for some time, and that's primarily because there's no way that the Green Party and the New Zealand First Party are going to agree together on the same issues around RMA reform.
Consultation on the government's proposal is open until October 10th, with the strategy likely to take effect in the first half of next year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It's about 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about it. Is it a strategy that's full of flowery words, as Judith Collins says, or is it a real solution, a step towards solving our housing crisis? You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Kingi Tuhetia says opposing mana whenua at Ehumātao should be given as much time as needed to reach a resolution on the eve of a planned march on the Prime Minister's electorate office. In an address on the 13th anniversary of his coronation, he talked about the kingitanga's relevance today and also its role in facilitating talks aimed at resolving the land dispute. There's been escalating protest action over the last month at the South Auckland site, where Fletcher Building is planning on building a 480-house development. Mani Dunlop has more.
Just over 2 weeks ago, Kingi Tuheitia Pōtatau Te Whirowhiro VII, with a contingent of more than 400 people, made his way to Ehumātao, offering to facilitate resolution talks. The discussions have been kept under wraps, but today in his speech at Turanga Waiwai Marae in Ngārua Wahia, the King confirmed that they are progressing, slowly but surely.
Much is yet to be done, but I'm encouraged by the kaupapa to date. The progress is ongoing. It will take time. Under my korowai and protection, the mana whenua can talk freely from unduress. They have waited 150 years for their confiscated whenua, and they deserve the time and space to consider the future of their ancestral land.
Kingi Tuheitia also addressed the outrage among many Maori at Oranga Tamariki and their role in uplifting babies deemed to be at risk. But he put a whittle down to ensure they look after and protect Tamariki.
My challenge is to the whānau hapu iwi to take care of our Tamariki, and where the need arises, to place them in a safe home. We must avoid blaming the government. We need to work on a solution. We have a chance to design the solution on our own.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister visited Turanga Waiwai Marae and was challenged by the President of the Maori Party, Shay Wilson, to stop hiding away from issues facing Maori. And Kingi Tuheitia was met with laughs when he reminded those gathered today that the Prime Minister invited them to hold her to account.
To hear her genuine commitment to fulfil the Crown's obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi. And she also invited us to hold her to account, which we will do.
Meanwhile, Fletcher Building said today it believed it was the right and respectful thing to do to halt works at the site until a resolution could be reached. The company had declined to comment until today, but speaking at its annual results announcement, Chief Executive Ross Taylor said the protest hasn't had an impact on the business and they are staying out of resolution talks between the Kingitanga and Manawhenua.
We need to not make comments from my perspective, and just to give the clear air for everybody to work through what is a very complex issue, and so I'm not going to comment on that for that reason. And we've been very deliberate about that for the last 4 weeks, and we'll continue to be, because I just don't want my commentary or Fletcher commentary contaminating that process.
Protesters are now focused on Jacinda Ardern and her ongoing refusal to visit them at Ihumātao. They plan to march on her office in Mount Albert tomorrow morning to deliver a petition calling for the Prime Minister to visit the whenua. For Checkpoint, ko Mani Dunlop-Aho.
The last two people charged after the massive 90-mile beach methamphetamine bust in 2016 have been sentenced today to lengthy prison terms. Stevie Norua Cullen and Selaima Whakaua Selea appeared in the High Court at Whangarei today before Justice Gordon. Lois Williams was there.
In June 2016, Kaitaia police, acting on a tip-off, found nearly half a tonne of meth in a camper van and stashed in the sandhills near Ahipara. Sceptical locals have been watching a group of men driving flash cars, trying to launch a boat, damaging it, and then heading off to Auckland to buy another one worth $90,000. They claimed they were burying a friend's ashes at sea. The two Asian men in the group eventually made the pickup from a boat waiting offshore. 6 people are already in prison after admitting their roles in the country's biggest ever meth haul. But Cullen and Whakao Selea denied the charges of importing Class A drugs and being part of an organised criminal group. They were convicted after a jury trial in June. At their sentencing today, their lawyers suggested the pair had played relatively minor roles compared to the major players, including 2 Tongan men and 2 from Hong Kong. But Justice Gordon was having none of it. She said Cullen had been a trusted lieutenant and chauffeur who organised boats, cars and motels for the group. And Whakao Selea, who'd been painted at her trial as a Tonga blonde, was no naive pawn, as her counsel claimed. Instead, she'd played an important role in handling communications and large amounts of cash.
Once it was apparent that an alternative means of landing the methamphetamine was required, the purchase of a boat was necessary. Members of the Northland Group travelled to Auckland for that purpose. I have determined on the evidence that you were the person, Blaze, who provided the money for the boat. That indicates a high level of trust in you. You were not the naive pawn.
A cultural report done for the court claimed Cullen had returned home to Hawke's Bay, hoping to set up a vineyard on whānau land, but couldn't raise the finance, and succumbed to the offer of making some fast cash by helping to import methamphetamine. He believed his problems in raising the money were down to the colour of his skin. The Crown lawyer Richard Annandale rejected that.
There are a great number of successful Maori people in our population and in our community. To claim, as the report writer seems to do, that Mr Cullen was at a disadvantage because of his Maori ethnicity would, in my submission using the Court of Appeal citation I've just referred to, appear to some a proposition that is offensive.
Justice Gordon sentenced Cullen to 27 years with a minimum period of 9 years in prison, and she sentenced Whakao Selea to 12 years and 6 months on top of the 14-year prison sentence previously handed down for dealing in meth and cocaine. She'll have to serve at least 7 years behind bars. In Whangarei for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
A public health academic has told a parliamentary committee that plans to fine parents for smoking in a car with children will be a waste of time if protecting kids is the end game. The Health Select Committee heard submissions on the Smoke-Free Environments Amendment Bill, which would see people fined $50 if they're caught smoking with under 18s in the vehicle. Now, the usual suspects were there, the Public Health Association, the Cancer Society, but another researcher with a different perspective kicked things off. Our reporter Emma Hatton was there too.
Mārewa Glover caused a stir this morning when, amongst a sea of supporters for the bill, she told politicians their plans wouldn't change a thing.
If you don't want people smoking around children, please put the money, time and effort into effective interventions to help those parents quit. This proposal, this law is a waste of time.
Dr Glover has researched smoking and the harm it causes for 25 years. She thinks fining adults for smoking in cars with children will be counterproductive and negatively impact on Maori women, 38% of whom smoke. She went on to say that the impacts of second-hand smoke had been greatly exaggerated, and children being in cars with smokers would not suffer long-term negative effects. When she explained that was why the measures proposed in the bill weren't necessary, committee members Liz Craig and Matt Ducey spoke up.
Actually, the evidence does not support the need for it.
I think that's just a point. We'll have to agree to disagree on that. Thank you.
Okay, well, Matt, last question. So your proposition today is that kids, it's okay for them to be forced into breathing in the appearance second-hand smoke because over time they'll heal. I mean, that's just outrageous.
Dr Glover confirmed the main point of her submission was government efforts should be focused on education and support for smokers to give up. The plan is to have an 18-month campaign leading up to the law to educate people in the hope that when it kicks in, the actual number of people being fined will be minimal. But Mārewa Glover says police shouldn't be playing a part in this.
The assumption there is that there'll be a campaign and the police will pull people over and they will give, cessation advice. But it's not a therapeutic relationship. If the police pull you over, for many people it's a very stressful situation. So they're not the right messenger.
Next up was Prudence Stone, the Chief Executive of the Public Health Association. Visibly shocked by Dr Glover's submission, she questioned her motives.
What a strange precedent that has been set this morning by the previous submitter. I would advise you from here on to clarify with every submitter whether or not they are receiving tobacco industry funding for their hearing scripts today and for their submissions written towards this legislation.
Ms Stone says the association supports the bill and says efforts to stop adults smoking near children need this type of legal backbone.
For children, the measure denormalises smoking. It disrupts what they might have grown up thinking was normal. It enables their rights to protest from the back seat, and it enables law enforcers to intervene on their behalf if their own voice is disabled, too small, or just simply ignored.
The only point that the association agreed with Dr Glover on was that a punitive approach was unlikely to be helpful. The Cancer Society also threw its support behind the changes, saying quite simply, it's not a good thing for a child to be in a car with a smoker. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
The e-scooter war is heating up. There's another brand in Auckland, one more heading to Christchurch soon. Supersized scooters and freebies and discounts to attract customers in a now competitive market. And they've hit some speed bumps. Scooters are being picked up by tow trucks, charging $200 each to release them. Jordan Bond reports.
It's getting hard to keep track of all the different animal and fruit-named e-scooters you have to dodge on our footpaths, let alone downloading all the apps to actually use them. Bright pink, new entrant Flamingo, started by two 21-year-olds, Nick Hyland and Jackson Love, launched in Auckland 3 weeks ago. It's rolled out 525 scooters, adding to the 400 they already have in Wellington. To get a foothold against behemoth Lime and fellow newcomer Wave, they're trying to outdo each other with deals.
Some of those key differences definitely come in handy, like our public transport zones, the student discount plan, and we also offer free helmets, which people can order through the app, which has been hugely popular as well.
Flamingo waive the unlock fee, $1, if a rider takes it from a train station or some bigger bus stops. For the safety conscious, they'll send you a free helmet, you just pay delivery, and also offer a student discount. In Wellington, Flamingo is battling Uber's scooter Jump. They're also soon to launch in Christchurch to take on Lime there as well, and also another company, Beam.
We're just coming up to 100,000 rides across both cities, which has been awesome to see. Our target for Auckland was 30,000 users in the first month from our full launch, and we're right on track to hitting that number.
Lime recently put up its price 8 cents a minute, but this week announced a new supersized offering to roll out soon. It has bigger wheels and a better battery, which makes it 5 kilograms heavier, as the debate rages on about whether they should be allowed on footpaths. But Auckland Council says it hasn't had an application from Lime asking if they can introduce the bigger scooters. Another problem in their rapid ascent to transport ubiquity, tow trucks. Annoyed residents have started calling them when they find a scooter on their private property. Auckland Towing says it has a garage stacked with about 20-odd scooters, which have been there for months because the companies won't pay the $200 fee each to release them.
The onus is on the scooter company has got to take responsibility for their clients leaving the scooters where they shouldn't be leaving them. And they can't really put that our responsibility onto us and say it's our fault. I mean, they've got the availability in their user contracts to recoup any losses from the person who hired the scooter to start with. Presumably they don't want to do that because it can make them look bad.
That's Auckland Towing's director Anthony Ashford. He says they don't take them from footpaths, only when they're called about them being a nuisance sitting on private property. He says the companies are just leaving them idle at the tow yard while they talk to their lawyers. But he says there's no way around it. $200, please. Both Lime and Flamingo say there's no reason why a tow truck's needed and they'll happily come take them off people's hands if they're a hassle.
We're still seeking legal advice on that, but we'd really encourage any private landowners to contact us first. We're happy to be really proactive and relocate any scooters. And we just want to make sure that scooter sharing works for the whole city.
There are now almost 2,000 scooters in Auckland, 800 in Wellington, and once Flamingo launches in Christchurch, 1,300. They're mostly $1 to unlock and then 30 cents a minute, apart from Lime at 38 cents a minute. Their success as a cheap, low-emission, first and last mile solution means they're here to stay as we all scoot into the future. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
Oh, do please get in touch if you've dobbed a scooter into the towies. I'd love to hear from you. Text me on 2101 or you can tweet me at checkpointrnz, email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Getting heaps of feedback on Southern Response. Don't forget, go online and answer the poll.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Islamic Women's Council is urging the government to approach Ukrainian authorities over the sale of the accused Christchurch gunman's manifesto. It has been republished in paperback and sold through an online messaging app channel run by a neo-Nazi in Ukraine since June. The council's acting head, Anjum Rahman, says the manifesto spread is dangerous.
It's extremely disturbing. We know that it has been used as motivation to take further life, and so the importance of dealing with this is very, very high.
Anjum Rahman wants the government to approach Ukrainian officials, but the Prime Minister says it's out of this country's jurisdiction and there is nothing she can do to stop the manifesto's overseas distribution. The judge who today sent a man to prison for 27 years for importing methamphetamine says stiff sentences are essential in such cases. Stevie Norua Cullen was sentenced today in the High Court in Whangarei for his role in the meth bust at 90 Mile Beach in 2016. He is one of 8 people now behind bars for trying to smuggle in half a tonne of meth, the country's biggest drug haul. Justice Gordon told Cullen the law demanded an emphatic response to the unprecedented scale of the crime.
More particularly, this jurisdiction must not be viewed as soft by those who may otherwise bring large amounts of controlled drugs here, especially a drug as pernicious as methamphetamine.
Justice Gordon in the High Court at Whangarei. The Defence Minister Ron Mark says New Zealand does not have the military capacity to help the United States in the Strait of Hormuz. Australia is to join the effort to protect international shipping in the waterway at the entrance to the Persian Gulf. The US has asked its allies to help out, but Mr Mark says New Zealand doesn't have anything to offer.
Both of my frigates are in Canada undergoing refit. We don't actually have any capabilities available.
Ron Mark says the Defence Force can barely keep 2 Orions flying at the same time. Nationals Defence spokesperson Jerry Brownlee says Mr Mark's excuses are embarrassing and New Zealand has a long history of offering assistance to the Middle East. Victims' advocates in Australia are celebrating a court's decision to uphold the convictions of George Pell. The former Catholic cardinal was jailed in March for 6 years after being found guilty of sexually abusing 2 choir boys when he was Archbishop of Melbourne in the 1990s. In a 2-1 decision announced today, the Victorian Appeals Court has dismissed his appeal and he will return to prison. Chrissy Foster, whose 2 daughters were abused by Catholic priests, says it's a great day.
It's a hard crime to get a conviction in the first place. Hardly anyone comes forward, and this has been an outstanding example of justice, and just amazed.
Pell's lawyers are now considering whether to take his appeal to the country's highest court in Canberra. They say he is disappointed with today's ruling and still maintains his innocence. Students at a private training institute with campuses in Auckland, Hamilton and Christchurch have been left in the lurch by the cancellation of its registration. The Qualifications Authority deregistered the Kiwi Institute of Training and Education last Friday. It says students won't be able to continue their studies there and it's contacting them to help with next steps. A spokesperson, Eve McMahon, says students' welfare is paramount and students who need their study records should contact the institute or the authority. A Dunedin GP says a rise in the number of colonoscopy requests being declined is putting patients at risk. Dave Mackay has written to the Southern District Health Board, saying doctors are frustrated that some of their referrals for potential bowel cancer patients are being turned down. A recent review of Dunedin Hospital's gastroenterology department found half of the 20 bowel cancer patients reviewed had a delayed diagnosis. Dr Mackay says patients may show signs of bowel cancer, but often can't get a colonoscopy until they meet certain guidelines.
Often we'll have a patient who we feel clinically could have cancer, but they don't fit the strict guidelines. One of the big things is we're seeing more and more people that are missing out on a colonoscopy and then down the track we're diagnosing cancer.
Dave Mackay says the DHB needs to work with GPs to make sure more colonoscopies aren't delayed or declined unnecessarily. The Taranaki District Health Board is urging people to check their immunisation status following the confirmation of another case of measles in Taranaki, the third in the last 6 weeks. The Medical Officer of Health, Jonathan Jarman, says a 21-year-old unvaccinated New Plymouth woman is the latest case. Dr Jarman says the DHB has been unable to determine the source of the infection, as it does not appear the woman has been in contact with either of the 2 previous cases. He says the Taranaki Public Health Unit is currently following up with people known to have been in contact with her. Dr Jarman says he cannot stress strongly enough the importance of being vaccinated against measles. The ACT leader David Seymour says allowing bars and clubs to stay open for Rugby World Cup games is a win for rugby fans and for common sense. The government is adopting Mr Seymour's legislation, allowing licensed premises to stay open outside their usual trading hours in order to show live games. Mr Seymour says it made absolutely no sense that thousands of bars and clubs were having to apply for special licences to open for a few extra hours, only to be turned down. The Sports Minister Grant Robertson says the government will make some changes before introducing the bill.
Obviously what we'll do now, because it is now a government bill, is go through and make sure it does what it needs to do. Mr Seymour's bill does cover all the games, and that would certainly be the intention for this bill.
National also supports the bill, so there should be no obstacle to it being passed before the World Cup begins. It's 6 minutes past 6. The Black Caps coach says it's a waiting game when it comes to Kane Williamson's suspect bowling action. The New Zealand captain was cited in the wake of the first test loss in Sri Lanka in Galle and must undergo testing. However, Gary Stead says Williamson will first be allowed to bowl in the second test, starting in Colombo tomorrow.
There was 3 or 4 balls they looked at that they thought may need more scrutinising, I guess, from a bending of the elbow point of view, and so Kane will go home after the test series, which was planned anyway, and then he'll get retested probably in Brisbane, I imagine. From there we'll know the process of how we either have to A, rectify an action, or B, we carry on as it is.
Kane Williamson was suspended from bowling in international cricket in 2014 when his action was deemed illegal. The Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare says his players know what will be required at the World Cup in China after their 34-point hiding from Canada in Sydney last night. A poor defensive effort saw New Zealand trounced 122-88, and the 2 sides play again tonight. Henare says if the players didn't know what was in store for them in China, they certainly do now, but they only have a few weeks to sort things out. After tonight's game, the Tall Blacks head to China for a 4-team tournament before their opening World Cup game against Brazil on September 1st. And the Kiwi Ferns back rower Georgia Hale has been named captain of the Warriors for Rugby League's upcoming NRL Women's Premiership. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Tipping has a Charlie Mingus edition of Inside Out. Kate Kirkpatrick talks about her new biography of Simone de Beauvoir, 70 years after she published one of the great feminist works of the 20th century, The Second Sex, and the journalist Neha Masih on her recent visit to the state of Kashmir, now no longer special under Indian law, but just as disputed, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. All the North Island except Gisborne to Wairarapa. Showers, possibly heavy. Hail tomorrow, isolated squally thunderstorms mainly in the north. Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered rain, clearing later tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow with rain about the ranges, but 1 or 2 showers spreading further east. Nelson and Marlborough, rain overnight, then fine apart from isolated showers. Bulla to Fiordland, rain about Fiordland, spreading elsewhere this evening, possibly thundery. Turning to showers early tomorrow, some heavy falls with hail and isolated thunderstorms. Canterbury to Southland, patchy rain developing tonight, clearing early tomorrow. Isolated showers about Southland and the southern lakes tomorrow afternoon and evening. And Chatham Islands, cloudy, occasional rain from tomorrow afternoon, heavier tomorrow night, possibly thundery. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. In news just at hand, the chair of the Civil Aviation Authority, Nigel Gold, has stepped down. Transport Minister Phil Twyford says he told Mr Gold the CAA was going through some big changes and it would be best to have fresh leadership at this time. He says he has thanked him for his service to the Civil Aviation Authority, and we'll have more on that later in our news bulletins. Forest and Bird is warning an increase in yellow-eyed penguins getting caught in fishing nets is pushing the nationally endangered bird to the brink of extinction. It estimates 30 of the penguins were caught in commercial nets last year, either at the bottom of the South Island or on the mainland's east coast. Here's our fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
Just 10 years ago, there were 600 nests counted in the mainland population of hoiho, which are one of the rarest penguins in the world. That's now down to 227, thanks in part to the impact of disease and possibly climate change. Forest and Bird's Kevin Haig says some commercial fishing nets are also a known threat.
The fishing method that's implicated here is set net fishing. It's one of the crudest mechanisms that we have for catching fish because basically the set net will catch everything that's in the water column.
Kevin Haig says the reason the death count from last year is an estimate is that most fishers are failing to report when they pull up birds in their nets. He says it's no coincidence the 3 penguins that were reported last year happened to be on boats with observers on board, noting that only 10% of boats in this region carry observers.
We fully expect that the number is a lot closer to 30 and potentially even more, of course. The industry cannot be trusted to self-police, and that we desperately need cameras on all fishing boats.
Forest and Bird also wants a complete ban on set nets in all areas where the penguins forage for food.
Here's the stark choice. Do we value this species enough to make changes to the places and the way that we fish? Or do we say the cost of making the transition in some way is too great and therefore we're prepared to see this species become extinct from the mainland on our watch?
The industry group Fisheries Inshore was approached for comment but was not available. In a statement it says Forest and Bird is scaremongering and questions the way it's estimated the 30 deaths. It says starvation, disease, predation by sharks and dogs are the real reasons numbers are declining. But penguin expert Professor John Cockram backs Forest and Bird's estimate of deaths attributable to nets.
Indeed, it's a very clear threat, and we can't directly address natural threats, but we can directly address the human threats.
The government is consulting on options to stop hoiho numbers from falling any further. Professor Cockram says while its proposal talks about the threats posed by nets, it doesn't suggest a fix, and this isn't good enough.
The hoiho is a threatened species. Its numbers are declining. And here we have one of the reasons for the decline, and that the reason that doesn't need to be there. So a ban on set netting is an action that would be beneficial.
The Minister of Conservation, Eugenie Sage, says she's discussing with officials whether more money is needed to help keep the penguins safe, or if more emphasis needs to be put on reducing marine threats. She says nets are a threat to hoiho. All eyes are now on her department to see if it will come up with a plan that works, or if we're looking at a future where the hoiho will be seen on the $5 bill and nowhere else. Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
The blame game was in full swing in Parliament today, with MPs accusing those on the other side of being responsible for high petrol prices. A Commerce Commission report yesterday confirmed that Kiwis are paying too much for petrol, with the fuel industry not as competitive as it should be. The government has vowed to act, but the opposition wants to know how. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Our instinct was that New Zealanders were being fleeced at the pump. Now the Commerce Commission has confirmed that it is true.
The Prime Minister in Parliament claiming vindication and vowing to act.
I note that the last government could have acted but decided it wasn't easy and decided to do nothing. It seems to me that was their general philosophy in government.
The retort setting a fire under the opposition early in question time, with Nationals' Paula Bennett accusing the government of doing the fleecing.
Will the Prime Minister then continue to ignore that it's the increases in taxes that she has put on everyday New Zealanders that she could take off tomorrow if she really cared about the cost of living for them?
I might take that side of the House a little more seriously if they weren't being hypocritical on the use of excise.
By the end of its 3-year term, the government will have put up petrol taxes by 10.5 cents, not including the 11.5 cent regional fuel tax in Auckland. When National was in charge, it put up taxes by 17 cents, but over a much longer 9-year period. But National also increased GST from 12.5% to 15%.
We will not ignore that New Zealanders are being fleeced. We will not write a sternly worded letter. If required, we will change the law, because that is what an active government who is not willing to ignore the hard issues does.
But the promises of action are drawing scepticism from the opposition benches, with constant cries, "Tell us what you'll do."
Can the Prime Minister outline actually what she will be doing to the petrol fuel companies, since it won't be just writing a letter, and she's at the moment got such strong convictions about how she's going to stop them from fleecing New Zealanders?
Mr. Speaker, again, the member demonstrating that she would prefer to defend the fuel companies on this issue.
So far, potential solutions floated include allowing wider access to infrastructure and boosting competition by allowing resellers to switch between suppliers. The Commerce Commission is due to finalise its report and recommendations in early December. For now, the government's all promises. Only then will the public see what it means in practice. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Almost 16 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To Hong Kong now, and a worker from the British consulate in Hong Kong has been detained in mainland China after it's alleged he took part in the pro-democracy protests. It's been 2 weeks since Simon Chung disappeared while visiting the neighbouring mainland city of Shenzhen. In a statement, the British Embassy in Beijing said, "We are extremely concerned by reports a member of our team has been detained." Meanwhile, Hong Kong's beleaguered leader, Carrie Lam, is now offering, quote, open and direct dialogue with the protesters to find a way out for Hong Kong. Jamil Andolini is the Financial Times Asia editor, and I asked him what he knew about the missing man.
His name is Simon Chung. He's a Hong Kong resident. He has a British national overseas passport, which is the strange passports that they gave out when Hong Kong was handed back from the UK to China. And those passports are not recognised in China, so he's not a full British citizen. He's actually from Hong Kong. So what happened is he went on August 8th, he was in Shenzhen across the border in mainland China, and on his way back, he was detained at the border when he was trying to come back to Hong Kong. And his role in the consulate is he's in charge of trade and development for Scotland, so he's working really as a trade and development officer. The suspicion is that he's been detained because of allegedly that he joined some of these protests here in Hong Kong. So he's been detained since August 8th, the evening of August 8th, and his family has no idea exactly where he is. The British consulate here doesn't actually have the authority to provide him consular assistance because he went to mainland China using his Hong Kong ID, and Hong Kong being part of China, he's considered a Chinese national and treated as such. So he's basically been disappeared in mainland China for nearly 2 weeks.
And what have the Brits said about this? How concerned are they?
Well, the British government is obviously very, very concerned. The embassy is, since the story broke on Tuesday, the British embassy in Beijing has issued a statement saying they're doing everything they can. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult because he isn't a British citizen. They actually are not legally under sort of Vienna Convention. They're not allowed to provide consular assistance, and the Chinese government doesn't have to cooperate at all. They don't have to tell them really anything. Obviously, it puts the UK in a very difficult position because in China's state-controlled media, the propaganda is that all of the protests, the majority peaceful protests that we've seen in Hong Kong over the last couple of months, the propaganda out of mainland China is that these protests are all the work of hostile foreign forces, the black hand of the evil colonial imperialists like Britain and America. So it obviously puts the UK in a difficult position because the UK is trying to make clear to the Chinese government and the world that they're obviously not behind the protests that are happening here. It's a very genuinely grassroots movement. But at the same time, if some of their staff have allegedly joined some of the protests, it makes it's quite difficult for them. And now that one of their government employees has actually been detained in China, they're in a somewhat similar situation to Canada, where 2 Canadian citizens have been held effectively hostage in the Chinese state security system for hundreds of days since last October.
Okay, well, let's turn to those protests that you're talking about there. Hong Kong's embattled leader, Carrie Lam, so she is offering, talks to speak to the protesters. Is this a genuine offer of, what should we call it, peace talks?
Well, there's a couple of things there. So Carrie Lam has steadfastly refused to engage with anybody on the side of these massive protests. She's steadfastly, for the last 3 months now, refused to engage or to really compromise beyond temporarily withdrawing the extradition bill that kicked all of this off. Now, the other problem that she has, and that Hong Kong has, is that this is a genuinely leaderless movement. This is a movement that's being organized on Telegram, on other social media apps. It is a true market of ideas where people, ordinary citizens, are sort of throwing ideas out into these chat groups. Good ideas are sort of rising to the top, and people are kind of agreeing to follow them, and bad ideas are kind of just dying. So it's almost, as I say, a market of ideas on the side of the protesters, which frankly makes them much more nimble than the Hong Kong government or the Chinese government in Beijing, but also makes it very difficult to sort of get off on the off-ramp, because who do you talk to? There is no leader you can sit down who can then order their followers to cease and desist. So it's unclear who exactly Carrie Lam's going to sit down and talk to.
So, with more protests planned and this massive protest over the weekend, obviously, how long can this go on?
Well, you have some pro-Beijing legislators here in Hong Kong who are saying that the hard deadline for Beijing is October 1st. October 1st will mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. It's a very important date for Chinese President Xi Jinping. He wants this to go off without a hitch. He wants tanks and missiles rolling through the center of Beijing to be the main symbol of the day. He wants the whole global media to be saying, look at the power of China, look at how strong China is. If instead the global media is focused on enormous protests down in Hong Kong on that same day, they would certainly overshadow this big parade that the Chinese president wants to hold. So many people here pro-Beijing people talking to their contacts up in Beijing say that he will absolutely not allow the protests or unrest here to continue beyond that date, or even up before that date. It will have to be crushed before then.
So does that mean military intervention?
The serious implication is that at least the paramilitary from mainland China might be sent in to quell the, as I said, largely peaceful protests. I wrote in a column last week that I believe that from talking to people in the mainland, in Hong Kong, and having studied the history of the Tiananmen massacre and modern Chinese history, and covering China for 20 years, I believe that the chances of military or paramilitary intervention are greater than 50%.
And that's Jamil Andolini, the Asian editor for the Financial Times. As you may have just heard, the chair of the Civil Aviation Authority, Nigel Gould, has stepped down. Transport Minister Phil Twyford says he told Mr Gould the CAA was going through some big changes and it would be best to have fresh leadership at this time. Well, Nigel Gould joins me on the line now. Good evening.
Yeah, greetings.
Why have you gone from the Civil Aviation Board?
Oh, very simply because the Minister requested that I go.
Can you tell us a little bit about that conversation? What did he say to you?
Exactly as I just indicated. He indicated that he has a wish that I step aside, so I agreed with that and I stepped aside.
What reasons did he give for wanting you to leave?
He gave no reasons in the conversation.
So do you feel that you've been fairly treated?
That's a leading question. I'm obviously disappointed. You know, my term should have finished in June, and as a request, I agreed to stay on for another 12 months. There are a lot of things going on within the world of aviation in New Zealand at the moment, and would have been, and I was prepared to make the time available and contribute to that. A lot of things which have potentially very wide impact, but that's not to be the case.
So you were prepared to stay on, but the minister didn't want you?
No, well, I stayed on because I was invited to stay on for another short period of 12 months, and as he's fully entitled to, he has indicated that there's major changes coming up, and there certainly are, and he felt, therefore, I assume it was sensible to make a change now, and that's his prerogative, and his wishes have to be responded to in the way I have.
So the statement that the Minister has put out says that he was looking for fresh leadership. What do you think he means by that?
You'll have to ask him what he means by fresh.
So was none of that explained to you?
No, the terminology used is quite correct. It was something along the lines of fresh leadership.
When did you have this conversation?
Yesterday.
And how much of a surprise was it to you?
Well, given that there's been some very inappropriate media focus on aspects within the authority, we're obviously very aware of the interest that's being placed upon us, and so alert to situations perhaps such as this, but it came as a surprise, correct.
So what do you mean inappropriate media focus on the CAA?
Well, you've seen the big meet-up that News Hub in particular have been doing over the issues of sexual harassment and bullying within the authority, as we extensively provided to them in terms of background which they didn't want to use. We have a very well-controlled program in those areas within the authority. We're very proud of what's been able to evolve over that period of at least the last 12 to 18 months. And they chose, for whatever their motive, that's I'm talking about the News Hub, to make a real meal out of what's very much a few crumbs.
Mr. Twyford was sufficiently concerned by information that was coming out from whistleblowers at CAA that he launched, an investigation into the culture there. So what responsibility do you take for concerns around the culture there?
Well, we're always prepared to support and participate in things such as that. And when he made that suggestion, we said absolutely, because in positions such as we have, you never know what you don't know. And if there is something which might be there that we have assumed not to be there, then it's good to be able to get some independent verification of it. So the program that she had indicated he wished to do some 2 or 3 weeks ago through the Ministry of Transport, we were fully engaged with and fully supportive of, and quite willing to see what might come out of it.
You questioned the motivations of people, whistleblowers, who came forward to raise concerns about bullying, alleged sexual harassment at CAA. Is that why you're going?
No, absolutely not correct. What we were questioning was the motives as to why they would not use the existing channels, which were very clearly defined within all our staff policy documents, and not follow those procedures, right through to the opportunity to talk to me or the Secretary of Transport in full confidence without any issues. I questioned with Newshub in particular, and I got full copies of the transcript available to me. I questioned of them why these people would choose to go down that channel when there's very clearly prescribed opportunities they have to talk in full confidence within the authority.
Is making those comments publicly, do you think, part of the reason that Phil Twyford has asked you to step down?
I can't make any comment about what his motive was.
So, have you left the building as such? Is that it, or?
You're asking, am I in Wellington at the CAA office? I'm certainly not there now. No.
Okay, so was it your involvement terminated immediately? In essence.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you repeat that?
Was your involvement with the CAA terminated in essence immediately following this conversation with Phil Twyford?
No, we have to go through a transition. There's some delegated authorities and responsibilities, etc., that need to be passed on. And, I've talked to them about how that will be undertaken in a very orderly and certainly, from my point of view, a very cooperative stance. My responsibility and interest in ensuring that the authority is not adversely impacted, potentially or otherwise, by my change.
We are almost out of time. Has anything you have done... Is anything you've done, are you partly responsible for the Minister asking you to step down? Your behaviour, anything you've done?
I've got no knowledge of any reason why there should be anything else, no.
All right, appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Nigel Gould, who is the outgoing chair of the Civil Aviation Authority. As you heard there, the Minister asked him to go, in essence. That is all we've got time for this evening. Thank you so much for your feedback on Southern Response. That is a story we will keep on, and we'll be back tomorrow, same place, same time.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We found out of that 43% of participants have reported that they've been bullied at work.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Whether or not it is appropriate to take